Let's talk a bit about mark making. At its very core, drawing is really just about putting marks on a page, whether they are skinny marks, broad marks. No matter what you're drawing them with, you are taking something in your hand and you are using your arm to drag that thing across the page. And so that's ultimately what mark making is all about. And there are 3 simple rules that we want to apply to our mark making. And these tend to fall in line with certain mistakes that people tend to make. So first, lines must flow continuously. What this means is your stroke must be singular and must, how do I put this? Let's look at the opposite instead, because maybe that clarifies it. We don't want to have a line that has a broken flow over and over and over. And one good example of this is what a lot of beginners use, and it's called chicken scratching, where they want to draw a line between 2 points, and because it's too long for them, they will instead draw a bunch of smaller lines and make it all the way there. And this is essentially what we're talking about when we say it has a broken flow. When your pen comes off the page, the flow there breaks. And in some of these, it's actually not bad. Like here, I broke the flow here, but you can actually very subtly see that there's a slight shift in the trajectory, but it's not the worst. But over here and here and here, it gets pretty bad, especially by the end. And so that's what you want to avoid. You want to draw your singular marks with a consistent and continuous flow. And you can see here that I missed the mark a little bit, but at least my flow was smooth and was continuous rather. One point that I should raise is that sometimes when later in the lesson or later in the Drawabox as a whole, we will talk a little bit about drawing through forms, which means drawing things that are not generally visible. If you have a box, this is how you might usually draw it, the 3 visible faces, but drawing through it means drawing the opposite side as well. And some people have a tendency to draw these as like broken lines. And that is not something I want you to ever do. A solid line is a consistent line that you can trust. It is reliable. You know that its trajectory is singular. If you break your lines, they're actually quite sneaky because you can't always tell right off the bat that the trajectory every time you lift your pen changes slightly. It's inevitable. That's just how it works. Because you lifted your pen and you put it back down, the trajectory is going to shift slightly, and as you can see here, it's actually gone off the initial path that I intended to put it on. You just won't be able to tell. So when we're looking at boxes and we're thinking about, this is future stuff, but when we're thinking about how they converge towards certain vanishing points, we want to be able to trust that our lines are smooth and consistent, and we simply can't do that with broken lines. So no chicken scratching, no broken lines. The next point that I want you to follow is lines must flow smoothly. And now a lot of beginners will, when they make their marks, they will be very focused on keeping their marks accurate. I remember when I was a kid, I would always be complimented, at least when I managed this, which wasn't frequent, on the accuracy of my lines. That, if I had a point here and a point here, and I really slowly kind of went at it, slow and steady wins the race and all that. And I went and I went and I went, and I made it all the way to the end. Now, that may look at a glance like a pretty good line. And frankly, it's better than it would have been when I was younger because I do have considerably more control now. But you can see these little wobbles here and there. What I might expect from a beginner is a considerably wobblier line where it's just, full of them. And the problem with that is that a wobbly line is not going to serve as a strong foundation for a solid form. When you have a, well, we keep coming back to boxes because that's frankly the name of the series. We have a box, it's going to feel a great deal more solid and firm if it's drawn with straight, smooth lines than it would with wobbly lines. I'm clearly exaggerating here, but you can already see how this is not, being perceived as a box with a lot of solidity to it. And so we want to keep our lines smooth because smooth, consistent lines are the bedrock of solid construction. I'm stumbling over my words here. They are the bedrock of solid construction. And that is what Drawabox really focuses on, the ability to construct things to be solid and believable. And so while your mark, if it's, smooth and consistent, it may not completely hit the mark. That one was actually pretty good. Let's see that one. It may not be completely precise, but you can still use that line. You can still work with it. A wobbly line isn't really good for much. And so we want to keep our lines as smooth as we can. And we do that by drawing confidently. Not slow and steady, but with confidence. And that means that once your pen touches the page, you are committed to that line, you are going to push through that stroke, and you are not going to hesitate. Don't worry about accuracy from the second that your pen touches the page. In the homework for the line section of this lesson, we talk about a technique called the ghosting method, which is what you're going to use to keep your accuracy in control without having to sacrifice a confident execution. And it does so by separating the process into multiple stages, where first you plan out the specific marks you want to make. Then you find a comfortable angle of approach, because rotating your page is perfectly fine, to line it up with a very confident and natural feeling trajectory. And then you go over the motion over and over and over, and there's another video on the ghosting method, but basically you build up muscle memory and then you execute it with confidence. But because you put in the extra work, your single execution is going to have a lot more control, because you'll be more familiar with that movement. The last point that I wanted to raise here was that your lines must maintain a consistent trajectory. And this can be a little bit confusing at times. It doesn't come into play so much earlier on in the lessons, but I have seen it come up where people have to make, say they've drawn a leaf. And this is actually from lesson 3, so you don't need to worry too much about it. And let's say they're adding some sort of a jagged edge to this leaf. And they will have a tendency to zigzag. I know this thing has a jagged edge, and so I've zigzagged back and forth. That's been a single stroke, but it's a single stroke with many different trajectories. Whenever you have a corner, a sharp corner, like here and here, that's when the trajectory significantly changes. You can have a curving line that still maintains a consistent trajectory. The rate of change of this curvature is consistent. But here, you suddenly have a major change. And whenever that happens, I want you to lift your pen and start a new stroke. So instead, what I would do is I would draw the line out, and then the line back in, and then the line out, and then the line back in. The reason is that this allows you to actually draw these lines with greater intention. When you zigzag, you go on autopilot, and you have a tendency towards the end to actually start getting even worse and to lose the sense of what kind of stroke you are making. But if you are designing and crafting every single stroke, then you are in full control of how that is being drawn. And in the case of fur, for instance, you want to have the control to design each tuft to be unique, rather than just, this is not convincing fur, not even remotely. They're all the same. They're all just a repeating rhythm, which the eye can detect very easily, and it can break the illusion that you're trying to create. So keeping your individual marks with different, or your marks with different trajectories separate helps you keep in control and in full control of what is actually being drawn. And so those are the 3 major rules about mark making that I want you to adhere to. Keep your lines continuous, keep their flow continuous, which means a single line rather than many different broken ones. No chicken scratching. Keep your lines smooth, meaning a confident execution and not a very slow, belabored one. Slow and steady wins the race, but only when your time is invested in the right areas. If you're investing all that time in the execution, you're not going to have a very smooth, strong line. That time should be invested in the preparation beforehand. And lastly, don't zigzag. Keep your different trajectories separate. Added little arrowheads to kind of convey the idea here. And so on. And that's that. So I hope this helped. Again, always read the lesson content, the written stuff that is. The videos are only here to help support that material, not to replace it. And whenever there's updates, they will happen, like even small updates, but they can still be important. They're more likely to happen directly on the written content. I may make revisions to the video, but it's going to be less frequent.